purely as a humanitarian effort. There were other motivations going on, perhaps partly economic, but also just simply the brutality of the American action there. Under very difficult circumstances, and no way to criticize sort of individual soldiers who are obviously traumatized by that, but the policy decision to go into Somalia was had many different motivations, let's just say, and pretty brutal and bloody outcome. But the film was, kind of just only presenting one side, pretty positive, saccharine image of the American attempt to do good, and of course, no good deed goes unpunished, and all these other self-serving ways of viewing that American power. In terms of what you're saying about Robert McGee, and films really should, the best films present archetypes, things that are universal to human beings, not stereotypes which are cliche and generally not very entertaining and ridiculous and sort of unhelpful. But my personal take on it is I try to see it as, of course, films are part of education. There's no doubt about that. But I think that the entertainment community should be there to entertain. I don't think they've got any particular. I don't think we should really be demanding that the entertainment community educates us properly about the world so much. But what we should be demanding is that they don't miseducate us and miseducate our children. And that's what's so dangerous about these movies that are presenting a warped view of history or a conventional view of history, but this has no sense of responsibility. The people who are making it they don't really care. They just want to, get another story out there, and they'll make compromises left, right, and centre. So, if you're going to be dealing with controversial historical source matter, or you're going to be talking about issues of race and gender, and you're going to be talking about issues of American power and warfare, you're kind of obliged to do that properly, and I think that's definitely not done in the Hollywood entertainment community.
I think that what's particularly insidious is that this kind of propaganda is not confined just to films where we might expect to see it, such as war films or political dramas, but you deal in your book with other genres as well, comedy, science fiction. Those are also good vehicles for propaganda as well, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Every genre, comedy, war, political drama, action-adventure films, they're all affected by the military at various points. Individual films within those genres have always been affected.
Well, give us some examples of how, say, science fiction has been used as a vehicle for propaganda. Avatar, for instance, which to me seemed like a pretty good anti-establishment message, but somewhere wasn't there something that might have been done a little differently?
I think that Avatar was something qualitatively quite different. They did literally have a American military force being this huge, repressive, nasty power. So I think that was really, quite an unusual thing to do. And part of the reason is that James Cameron, who made the movie, he had a huge budget and had no need to get the Pentagon on side or have them advise or provide aircraft carriers. He could do everything on CGI. So, to that extent, the film broke out of that kind of ideological straitjacket. Whether I'd quite call it, as the Sydney Morning Herald said, saying that the snarling vipers of left-wing Hollywood have been let off the leash, or the Pacific Free Press calling it the biggest anti-war film of all time. I'm not sure I'd quite go that far. I think it was a movie. I think that was pretty light, really, on politics. I don't know. It certainly didn't ruffle any feathers as far as I've been able to find in any of my research, at upper levels. I know that Rupert Murdoch, who's the head of News Corp and Fox, his subsidiary, produced the film. He watched it in a screening, and the only comment that I've been able to find on record is that he said, well, this 3D technology is going to be great for Premiership football matches. So if someone like a very, very hard line, very politicized, right-wing figure like Rupert Murdoch, doesn't care less about the politics of Avatar, then, I think probably that just speaks to the fact that it was not really a very sort of serious piece of work. But at the same time, it did kind of raise issues of environmentalism and that kind of thing. There wasn't a great deal of conviction behind it.
There was that interesting use by the Palestinians. There was this news report about Palestinians dressing up and painting themselves blue and attacking the Israeli tanks in Gaza, a la the scenes from the movie Avatar. I know my wife, she still hasn't seen the movie, and she objects just to the obscene amount of money that was pumped into it, with her point being, well, if he really wanted to affect change, couldn't he have just donated that money to some charity? You mentioned Murdoch, and I wanted to mention this is another one of those examples where you put something in print that may not be available anywhere else. And after you, in the book early on, you mentioned this guy Neutron Jack and his connections to NBC and the stolen election. But then you also go on to talk about quotes from Rupert Murdoch, who I'm going to now call Neutron Murdoch, where he was apparently trying to get the politicians to threaten the Chinese.
Yeah, I know what you're referring to. The case of Rupert Murdoch's quite interesting. He's kind of known as a newspaper magnate sort of thing. He's not really associated that much with Hollywood. I guess that's a bit of an exaggeration. He is, but he's not sort of known to be hands-on within the community, and he kind of has got more of a reputation within the news. But actually, he's routinely named by the industry press as the most powerful person in Hollywood. And he is, of course, a notoriously right-wing kind of reactionary figure. The thing you're referring to, I think, is that during negotiations with China over the future of Hong Kong in the 80s, Murdoch expressed a view to one of his, I think it was the guy who was editing the Times, that the British should make no concessions and tell the Chinese that there's a Trident submarine off their coast, and if the Red Army moves into Hong Kong, they should be left in no doubt that we'll nuke Beijing. And this is from this a well-known journalist in Britain called Andrew Neil. He says that, I quite like Andrew Neil's follow-up comment. He says, Murdoch then thought about this for a moment and then added, I suppose we could fire a warning nuke into a desert first.
Amazing.
Kind of nuke light. But no, I haven't ever seen those comments from... Andrew Neil's book was, I think it was a bestseller, it's a major thing in the mid-90s, reviewed everywhere, but no, I haven't seen those particular comments replicated anywhere, not online. And I just thought it was quite significant because Murdoch's got, very a big deal of business interests in China now, and also for someone to say such a thing, and then it be reported by a very reliable source and close, someone who's worked very closely with him. That's a crazy thing to say. It's an insane thing to say. And now the extent to which he maybe he was joking. He certainly didn't seem to be. And whether he was actually able to pressure, whether he wanted to or had an inclination or ability to pressure the British government into their foreign policy over that particular thing is debatable. I rather doubt that he was able to do anything. But of course, the Murdoch press, particularly in Britain, or I think he owns newspapers in the States as well. He owns The Sun, for instance, which is the biggest selling tabloid paper here, and of course Fox News. And so, he's a powerful force, and if saying those kind of things, it makes me question his kind of humanity, really.
Yeah, around that same part of the book, you drop the interconnections between the boards and CEO-ships of companies as diverse as Disney and Boeing and DreamWorks and Northrop Grumman, and the atrocities that companies like GE, the American Air Force, and the Israeli military have been linked to everything from human experimentation to pollution and bribery and other scandals. So, I think it's true of any time you get a big corporation, there's going to be a seedy underbelly of all their atrocities and scandals and abuses of power. Now, going back to what Mac brought up as far as the science fiction and other genres, I did find it really interesting, the different examples that you gave of films that were the exception, the films that seemed to actually buck the establishment. Well, I'll get to the. Well, there's another question I wanted to ask you, but as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, it was your articles in 40 Times and other locations that seemed to be focusing more on the science fiction element, and there was some interesting data, like the fact that I think this is not a fictional movie per se, but Robert Emenegger's UFOs Past, Present, and Future and Michael Bay's Transformers had something in common in that they were the only films where a particular secretive American military base had ever allowed filmmakers on site. So can you give us some of the background in your research into the science fiction element?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll talk about the UFO angle, if you like. I've been working with Robbie Graham, who's a UFO expert, doing a doctorate at the University of Bristol. And, I mean, my area really is in propaganda, and that's why I'm interested in it. I'm not much of an expert in what actually UFOs are. But we did that piece for the 14 Times a couple of years ago, but actually we've got a new, vastly updated piece of work coming out in a peer-reviewed journal in a few weeks' time called 49th Parallel, if any of your listeners are interested. And I'd say that that's a comprehensive a piece as ever has been done, certainly as far as we're aware, about the involvement of the government in the manipulation of images of UFOs, so perception management of the way that unidentified flying saucers have been presented. So we've had many cases of this. It's been kind of I'm sure you know, like, there's been a lot of rumours about that kind of thing for years. You know, was tea, for example, a way of, acclimatizing the world's population to accept alien visitation or whatever, you know? So there's kind of a lot of swirling rumours about it. And so that's why me and Robbie took a really careful look at it. And we're really pleased with the piece that we've produced. Much more advanced, I hope, than the original piece from 14. But yeah, we found loads and loads of examples of military involvement. One of the most striking ones was that which we opened the article with, is that there was a CBS TV show where Donald Kehoe went on. You probably know Kehoe, and he was asked. You know, that they were doing a special about UFOs called UFO Enigma of the Skies, and Kehoe was this retired U.S. Navy major. And he had been involved in sort of the government investigations into what flying saucers were. But they'd scripted everything in advance, and everyone was meant to just read from a teleprompter. But when Kehoe did actually speak, he was so frustrated by the whole process that he veered away from the script and actually stated to the American people, he said, "I'm now going to reveal something that's never been disclosed before." But the rest of his announcement was completely unheard by television viewers, because unbeknownst to Kehoe, his microphone had been cut by the station. And, this is a great little story, we thought. And we actually managed to chase down a letter from CBS, who was responding to complaints about what had happened. And, they said, well, sorry, this is a matter of national security. And there are plenty of issues, plenty of similar cases, really, where there's been very sort of strange government involvement in pictures that are discussing UFOs. In the case of Transformers, I mean, yes, they did allow, very unusually, they did allow there to be filming at Holloman Air Force Base, I think on another military installation as well, which is extremely unusual. I mean, they don't tend to open up military bases for film crews. I'd say that in that case, it was really just because they were going to be showing off extremely cool-looking equipment, and the military looked great. I don't think there was a sort of hidden program there. In the case of the Emenegger documentary, as many, many people are aware from the mid-70s, that no one knows why the government provided such extensive assistance to a film that was really promoting the extraterrestrial hypothesis quite strongly. I mean, from the discussion we've been having today, and from reading my book and other things, the military is not terribly keen on promoting anything that makes it look bad or weak or defenseless or